This episode is brought to you by Downtown Inglewood and Easel. Looking for a way to support artists and small local businesses? Inglewood's Second Saturdays has you covered. This August 8th, check out art gallery openings at Blue Tile, The Drop Shop, and N Collective. Tour art studios and get creative at the Art Students League, Carousel Arts, Easel, Frame Day Art, and Ink Lounge. Shop for treasures at Kitschy Witch, Ilsa, Merrick Brothers Books, and Mutiny Comics, or enjoy a beverage at Lady Justice Brewing. Find information about monthly happenings at easel-co.com/Second Saturdays. That's easel-co.com/Second Saturdays, or check the link in our show notes.
Welcome to CityCast Denver. I'm Adrian Felix, and here's what Denver's talking about. We are talking about 4 a.m. drunken behaviors, slavery acknowledgements, and our wins and fails of the week. All right, Denver, let's get this started. I'm Adrian Felix, and I'm super excited for our episode today. Our contributor is Elliot Wensler, our City Hall reporter from Denver Post. How are you doing today, Elliot?
Hey, Adrian. I'm good. Thanks for having me on.
Sure. I wanted to tell you before we actually dived into your reporting that I was super happy to have you on today because I have such a respect for local government reporters, city hall reporters, in specific because when I thought I was going to be a journalist, I thought that that's exactly what I was going to be doing. I actually attended CSU for a few semesters with a journalism major, and some of the stories I had to do were local government, but it also made me realize that it is incredibly detailed. You have to get the facts right. And more importantly, you have to be willing to really work with local elected officials. And I can be quite offensive. So with that said, I just wanted to say that I deeply admire the work that you do.
Well, thank you so much. That's very kind.
For sure. So let's go ahead and dive right in. The first story that I wanted to cover today was the 4 a.m. close ordinance. So during their meeting on Monday, City Council rejected a proposal within a broader ordinance that would allow businesses like nightclubs, venues, and strip clubs to remain open until 4 a.m., but under current state law would still have to stop serving alcohol at 2 a.m. Denver's Department of Licensing and Consumer Protection hoped that the later time would decrease violence that occurs during peak intoxication. Ironically, this vote had been delayed in July due to a deadly shooting at the Ultra Lounge East that left 1 dead and 8 injured. Elliot, while this portion of the broader ordinance was removed with an approved amendment from Councilwoman Jamie Torres, I wonder if you could speak to the parts of the ordinance that did pass and what it hopes to accomplish.
Yes, that was a great summary. And I've been on the show before to talk about this issue. The main thing that a lot of folks were focusing on is this 4 a.m. piece, because it's very flashy, obviously. Interesting to imagine clubs being open until 4 a.m. But that was really just one small piece of this overall package, which intended to update all of the city's licensing around nightclubs. So there used to be 16 different licenses. And now that this has been passed, there's only 3. And so it's just simplified, probably only really interesting to folks who operate these businesses, frankly, that element of it. But the other piece of it is hopefully some added safety requirements for nightclubs. So one of them is that you have to prohibit weapons if you're going to operate a nightclub. You have to have surveillance videos available, things like that. And you have to have a safety plan as well.
Sure.
So you have to sit down and think out, how are you going to try to prevent violence in the lines for, admission when people are waiting outside to come indoors, when people are dispersing at the end of the night, when they're within 25 feet of the facility, the business is going to have some expectation to try to disperse people in an orderly way. So things like that are things that some Denverites who like to go out at night may notice.
Sure. I guess the biggest surprise of the list that you said that I find most surprising is this idea of weapons not being allowed into these places. It's, I guess, surprising to me that that wasn't already the case, but I imagine that this ordinance deals with how specifically they have to take care of that, whether that be security at the door or anything like that.
Right. Yeah. So I think that there probably are some overlapping rules here. This is, adds for a licensing requirement that there can't be weapons indoors. And so I believe, yeah, they have to put up signage now that says weapons are prohibited. There was an earlier version of the bill that required all nightclubs to have, and like venues and stuff like that, to have a security guard posted at the door too.
Sure, sure.
But that's actually didn't end up in the final version of the bill. So it's actually not that detailed of how they are supposed to go about enforcing that. But it is
interesting.
There's like also a lot more little nitty gritty details of this that are going to be worked out going forward in a process called rulemaking. So there will be kind of more details around many parts of this that are worked out, I think maybe including around prohibiting weapons.
And so to circle back to what, like, I guess the main draw of this ordinance was being that 4 a.m. closing time. Why do you believe in particular that provision failed? And what was the pushback from council?
Yeah, so Councilwoman Jamie Torres is who brought the amendment. And she just said that this was one part of it that she just couldn't get behind. She said that there just wasn't enough data to show that it would actually decrease violence, basically. This is something that the head of the department who brought this talked about, Molly Dupleshain. She mentioned that a lot of people seem to think that it was going to be continuing to serve liquor until 4 a.m. And that wasn't the case. Liquor still has to be, as you mentioned at the top, has to be cut off at 2. But it seemed like there was some community concern that it was just going to be people continuing to drink. And I don't think that any of the council members thought that, but it may have just led to some of the community concern around some of these places staying open until 4 a.m. It also would have been citywide. So it would have been not just like the ballpark area. It could also be anywhere else in the city that had one of these licenses. And so there are obviously parts of the city that it's kind of hard to imagine there being clubs open until like 4 a.m. And so I think that was also a concern I heard from like Councilwoman Sawyer brought that up, who represents kind of the Cherry Hills area. And so I think those were some of the concerns that led to them saying, let's just remove that part. Like there's so many other pieces of this ordinance. So let's just take that out since it's somewhat controversial. They did say, well, what if we, we're still somewhat interested in this idea. What if we just have like a limited pilot program of this in like a certain geographic area? So like in Lodo, for instance.
So that's actually a perfect segue into my next question is, from what they said, do you have an idea of what a pilot program would look like? And then what would the next steps be in order for them to return that to council?
Yeah, so they did talk about that. Councilwoman Torres mentioned it when she brought the amendment. Molly Dupleshain said that they were interested in pursuing that after the council meeting. So it sounds like there is at least some momentum, but there wasn't much of a time frame of like when that might happen. It would have to come back before council again. So we'd probably have some heads up about that. But just from what they said, it sounds like it would be something that's pretty limited to like a specific area with like some of those concentrated business licenses of this kind. So I'm thinking like Lodo. And it would just, I'm not sure how long it would be, but for some amount of time. And then during that period, the city would be focused on trying to get as much data as possible and comparing that to times when there isn't a 4 a.m. let out. Because the whole idea is like, maybe people will just keep listening to music for another 30 minutes or an hour. And some people will leave immediately at 2 and some people won't leave until 4. And so there won't be this like need for resources like food and Ubers and things like that. And so, yeah, they'd be trying to compare that period to previous times to see if it makes a difference.
So what I find the most interesting about this is that I did think of, if this had passed, how would this apply in my own life? And I'm just going to be honest with you, there is no way in hell you're seeing me up at 4 a.m. at the clubs. But I was also curious too, of like, if there was any data that like people do linger around. It's very hard for me to imagine.
So I don't think that there's necessarily any data that shows that people would hang out. I think it seems like something that would be hard to get until the opportunity existed. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Denver just hasn't had anything that does this. I think there's just a hope that maybe people would, continue to stay around. I mean, Denver's such a music hub.
Yeah.
And so I think the idea is like, if music is continuing to play and people really want to sit and enjoy music. It's extremely unlikely that you'll find me anywhere out until 4 a.m.
I was just going to ask.
Yeah, unless I'm reporting for a story like this, which would actually be kind of fun. But in my youth, when I was younger and would go out, once was in Chicago, and there was this like bar that was known for handing out freshly baked cookies at closing time. And so people would always want to go there. And I've just always thought about that. Like, what if somewhere in Denver had fresh baked cookies at the bar that they're handing out? Maybe people would
I'd 2
hang
to
out
4
for that.
a.m.
Yeah. Suddenly you'll see me hanging out until 4 a.m.
Well, perfect. I think that's a good place to end on that segment. And when we come back from this quick break, we will talk about slavery acknowledgement. So the next report that I wanted to discuss that you had covered was the slavery acknowledgement that had been proposed by council member and newly entered mayoral candidate Chantel Lewis, which references Jim Crow and the KKK, and it's to be read at the beginning of every city council meeting. So acknowledgements, for our listeners' understanding, are a new concept at all for the city of Denver. I was hoping, Elliot, that you could be able to speak to the current land acknowledgement, since I know you've probably heard it a million times during your coverage.
Yes. So this is something that the Denver City Council will read before each of their meetings. And so for those who follow City Council very closely, you hear this all the time. It rotates who reads it, but it's around the same time as they say the pledge. And just to give you an idea of what it sounds like, this is part of the script. The Denver City Council honors and acknowledges that the land on which we reside is the traditional territory of the Ute, Cheyenne, and Arapaho peoples. And then it goes on and recognizes other tribal nations, honors elders past, present, and future, and things like that. And then at the end, it notes that the hope of the acknowledgement is to demonstrate a commitment to work on the ongoing legacies of oppression and inequities, and recognize the current and future contributions of Indigenous communities in Denver. So it kind of has many different parts,
Sure.
but it's something that's read at the beginning of every council meeting. And I think that's just really important for folks to know about as they're learning about this possible new acknowledgement.
And I think I read from your reporting that acknowledgement, the land one, has existed in Denver City Council since 2020?
Correct.
Okay. And then also for context, I wanted to read the proposed acknowledgement. And so it goes, "We acknowledge and remember those who did not survive the Middle Passage, as well as those who were beaten and lynched at the hands of white Americans. We recognize the terror inflicted by the Ku Klux Klan, who historically counted among their members numerous government officials in Denver and other positions of power. We stand with those who are still suffering while fighting for their freedom. We acknowledge how these dehumanizing practices have social, legal, and economic legacies that continue to reverberate through the generations, and so acknowledging commit to truth, accountability, and repair." Now, with that said, from your reporting, I read that a lot of council members were actually very supportive of the proposal, but some of them had some tweaks about maybe who was included and some of the wording. And I was curious if you could speak to that.
Yeah, thanks for reading that. And that, I think, is starting in kind of the second section of that acknowledgement. And the first part of it does specifically call out the work of enslaved people and the legacy of chattel slavery. And so I think that's important to note, because the original name of this acknowledgement is actually a labor acknowledgement.
Yes.
And so I think that was sort of what led to some of the conversations that happened among council members who said, well, like specifically the new council president, Diane Romero Campbell, said, well, if this is a labor acknowledgement, I'm wondering if we can possibly include migrant workers or the work of, Japanese Americans who were brought into internment camps and things like that. So that was one question that she brought. And it didn't sound like that was exactly what Councilwoman Lewis was aiming for. Yes. Yeah. So that was one point of kind of disagreement within the meeting. And then there was also the point that Councilman Chris Hines made. He asked about specifically naming white Americans. And he asked if there were any other cities who named a perpetrator like that, or if anyone else who has this type of acknowledgement just focuses on, the system of slavery.
Sure.
Which I should point out, I don't know that there's actually any other city that has something like this. He asked Councilwoman Lewis about that, and she said she didn't know, and that Denver actually could be the first city to have this type of acknowledgement read at the beginning of a meeting. But I think some organizations have stuff like this, or nonprofits.
Sure.
But maybe not any city. So I just think that's kind of an interesting point that Denver could be the first.
And so I guess my question for you is that during that meeting, did Councilmember Lewis seem open to the idea of tweaking and adding groups, or was she very specific about wanting to keep this about a slavery acknowledgement?
Yeah, I think for those who are really interested, it is a fascinating conversation that you can go and watch on the council website. So for those who are most interested, I would encourage checking that out. But in summary, it sounded to me like she had not really considered that and didn't want to add those additional groups. It was discussed maybe there should just be a different acknowledgement for migrant workers. It sounded like she really wanted this one to be focused on people who were owned rather than migrant workers. There was discussion of the difference between those things. And so that was why the conversation at a certain point sort of shifted to, well, maybe the word labor acknowledgement is somewhat confusing for folks. I'll say among our newsroom, when we talked about it at first, people thought, oh, maybe this is about union work.
Sure.
And I think that's something that folks have heard. And so there was discussion of what other names it could be. There was a quick mention that maybe it could be a slavery acknowledgement, but that's not final language. That hasn't, the new name has not been set in stone yet.
So that's a perfect segue into me asking the question of what exactly the next steps are for this proposal.
Right. So the council president asked for a little bit more time to have a briefing, to learn a little bit more about the process of how they got there. And I think some other council members are also having briefings. So those conversations are going to kind of happen separately. And then it will come back to committee, I believe, at their August 11th meeting. They will consider it again. And at that point, it could be delayed again, or it could go before the full council, who would either vote to approve or reject that language.
Well, I think that's a perfect way for me to go ahead and say, and maybe ask in case that Councilmember Lewis is listening, that I would love to have you on to maybe discuss this as well as her mayoral run, as I'm sure that these are probably closely tied. But fantastic. I certainly appreciate your reporting on that, Elliot. When we come back from this break, we will do our wins and fails of the week. This is my favorite segment of CityCast because it's the one that I kind of do on a bi-weekly basis, which is our wins and fails. But before I get to our wins and fails, Elliot, I would like to ask the audience to maybe give theirs and also maybe let me know how I'm doing. Be sure to leave me a voicemail at 720-500-5418. I would love to hear from you. So to begin this segment, let's go ahead and start with fails, because I would like to end the podcast, especially my podcast week, on something optimistic. So what is your fail of the week, Elliot?
My fail of the week is that the Squire Lounge on Colfax is partly underwater. Did you see that news, Adrian?
Yes, I actually covered this earlier this week with Westward. And so it's very saddening because on one hand, you want to listen to the business owner that has been dealing with the mess of all of the construction that is happening on Colfax. And then you also want them to get some sort of justice to have the city investigate whether their construction maybe have led to this. But it is a very sad story.
Totally. Yeah. I think I also have questions about what led to this. But regardless of what led to it, I mean, these photos are just devastating. And it's really sad to see a Colfax business experiencing yet another, difficulty, and especially one with so much history. And so, yeah, definitely sending them sending them care as they deal with that situation. If you haven't seen these photos, go check them out. It's pretty crazy, especially since it's been so dry and hot. It's kind of wild to look at these pictures of flood damage in Denver right now.
Yeah, when I was discussing the issue with Patty Calhoun, it's so funny because I had mentioned that the current owner has owned the business for 22 years, and she's like, "Yeah, but it's been open since the 70s." And I was like, "What the?"
Right.
But I guess also too, like after you see the photos, to realize that the business owner had said that it adds up to about $30,000 in damage, and this is their livelihood. So very, very sad story.
That's significant. Yeah, what was your loss of the week?
So my fail of the week is actually 9 News reported it on Wednesday morning that all 64 counties in Colorado are under air quality alerts, and that they expected it to get worse on Thursday and Friday because heat is in fact picking up. Tuesday, Wednesday were obviously a little bit cooler days, but they expect Thursday and Friday to be hot. It's a fail for me in particular at this moment in the year because kids are just trying to enjoy like the end of summer before the realities of school come. And I want to say DPS, I believe, opens on the 24th. So they have a few weekends left of being able to enjoy the outside before they have to go to school. But it's just a fail to me because they're kind of missing out on that fun. But I also wanted to make the note that because of the alerts, that the safest thing that you can do is stay inside. And in specific, they ask that the elderly, children, and babies, as well as people that are maybe predisposed to like respiratory infections, stay inside. So it's a sad overall thing that the state is really going through this when we knew that it was coming, and that the sadder part that it may be our new normal.
Totally. Yeah, I have been really bummed about this week. I actually had a respiratory infection earlier in the summer, which is a bummer, but my symptoms have started to come back because of, I believe, because of the air quality, because I've been, going on walks and things like that. And so, yeah, it's no joke out there. I know that, people are seeing all the signs that say exercise indoors, but I really think it's a good idea to heed those warnings. And yeah, just looking outside right now, it's so spooky to not be able to see the mountains. I feel like my whole orientation is thrown off during these periods.
Well, I think that I had read somewhere that a lot of government officials are saying, like, they think that the hope that most people have is that this is just an off year. But again, to be prepared that this may be like the new normal. And I think that is like just quite scary and quite sad. And again, I want to bring this back to like the idea of our kids and our future. I'm not a parent, but I have 3 nieces that I absolutely adore, and I want them to enjoy the end of the summer. And so I guess I would like to say that it's a fail, but I'm hopeful that people are a little bit more cognizant about, climate change and what it is that we can be doing at a personal level to just maybe make their future a little bit brighter. But with that said, I would like to now get into the more positive side and our wins for the week. So I will begin with you, Elliot.
Absolutely. And I love the finding the silver lining of the fail. We got to do
You have to in 2026.
Yes. So my win for the week is I loved seeing that Rob Cohen over with the Summit FC is planning on trying to get a future Women's World Cup here in Denver. I think that just sounds really exciting. And after watching so much World Cup soccer over the past few months, I think it would be really neat to have the Women's World Cup here in Denver.
Obviously it would be great for like businesses and the economy here. But what I will say on a personal level is that I used to work in Spanish media, and our biggest event of any year would be the World Cup. So I feel a little bit traumatized when anyone says World Cup, because it would make my job very difficult waiting for games to end and everything that comes with it. But obviously, this would be a benefit for Colorado. So for that sake, I will say that sounds like a fantastic idea. And I also don't work in Spanish media anymore, so have at
it. Go for it, Denver. Yeah, I think it would just bring a lot of excited fans to the city. And it was really cool to see the way that, fans came to the U.S. for this most recent World Cup, and it seemed like generally a pretty jolly time all around. So I would love to see that here.
I guess my question is, because I'm not a sports fan, are you a sports fan? Like, would you attend? And then what teams would you be looking forward to?
Me?
Yeah.
Would love to hear from our listeners as well on this.
Right.
Because am I a sports fan? I am like a casual sports fan when the story's good, when the context is good. You know, when there's a guy who, you know, there were so many situations in the World Cup where it was like, his mom's in the crowd and she's so proud of him. And I'd be like, this is awesome. You know, or like, just some of those like heartfelt stories really get me to engage in sports. But obviously Team USA, the women's team, is so great. So I would definitely be rooting for them.
Well, I love that I asked that and that I kind of caught you off guard, because if someone were to ask me that question, I would have answered the exact same way.
Yeah.
I'm like, not a sports ball fan at all. But I will say that if I'm invited to the game and you're paying and you have the ticket, I'm all in.
Right.
Yes, that's the way it should
and
be.
Live sports are also tend to be more fun, I think, than watching on TV. Don't come for me, sports fans. I don't know if that's a hot take or not, but it's my personal opinion.
I don't. I think that would probably be something our viewers would agree on. That said, my win of the week is actually far more personal. I'm going to say me. I survived this entire week of doing CityCast podcasting, whether that was hosting or co-hosting or contributing or, you know, pitching news, interviewing. It all reminds me of like how hard it is to work in media. And again, why I give you all your praise for being an actual journalist. But beyond me giving myself flowers, I also want to give flowers to Bree Davies, who is on vacation. Is that truthfully, she's the winner in all this because she doesn't have to deal with us this week. And that my hope is that she'll get to come back to a podcast that hasn't been canceled by me.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, congrats on making it to the other end. That is definitely a feat. And I appreciate all your thoughtful questions today.
Yes, it was wonderful to have you, Elliot. It was a great episode. So thank you.
Thanks.
I'll be out tomorrow, but stay tuned for a special call-in episode of Your City Could Be Better, where CityCast CEO David Plotz and the hosts in DC and Seattle will be digging into city etiquette conundrums from all of our CityCast teams. You don't want to miss it. That's all for today here on CityCast Denver. Our producers this week were Paul Caroli, Olivia Jewel Love, and Lizzie Goldsmith. Adrian Gonzalez is our post-producer. Michelle Polizzi and Jason Patton write our morning newsletter. I'm Adrian Felix, filling in for our regular host, Bree Davies. Our music is by Los Mocochetes, with additional mixing by Tyler Lindgren. Our ad music is by Cuba Quartet, courtesy of epidemicsound.com. If you haven't already, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, follow us on Instagram at CityCast Denver, and tell a friend about us the next time you see them. You can support this show and get great perks by becoming a CityCast Denver neighbor at membership.citycast.fm. You can sign up for our daily newsletter and learn more about us at denver.citycast.fm. See ya!